Well, welcome to our Southern Fiction Author event from Tyndale House Publishers. I'm Chris Fabry, and I will host this whirlwind conversation with T.I. Lowe, Robin W. Pearson, and Michelle Shocklee. We love words, we love good books, we love sweet tea, and we love a story that sticks to your soul. And we love hearing from readers as they tell us, this is what's happened on the inside. It's one thing to hear from a reader who says, I really liked your story. It's a great story. It's another thing to hear what happens to a reader who says to you, here's what happened to me as I read your story. This is what I felt like as I went through what your characters went through. It felt like it was real to me. That's what we love to hear. A quick introduction, T.I. Lowe is the author of nearly 20 published novels. Her debut, Lulu's Cafe, was a #1 bestseller. She lives with her husband and family in coastal South Carolina. Her latest is Under the Magnolias. Robin W. Pearson's writing sprouts from her Southern roots. She has corrected grammar up and down the East Coast in her career as an editor and writer that started with Houghton Mifflin Company 25 years ago. Her debut novel, A Long Time Coming, won a Christie Award, and her latest is the second in a trilogy, Till I Want No More. And Michelle Shocklee is the author of several historical novels, married to her college sweetheart, and the mother of 2 grown sons. She makes her home in Tennessee, not far from the historical sites that she writes about. Her latest is Under the Tulip Tree. And I'm Chris Fabry, mild-mannered radio host by day, who writes stories because they just haven't been able to figure out a way to get me to stop. There are some Christie Awards back there, I think, and my latest is A Piece of the Moon, which it's waxing and waning here in front of me. So here's what I want to do. I want to open up with an opening question that is where I come from. They call it priming the pump. I don't know if that's where it is, what it was where you're from, but we're going to prime the pump with this question. When do you first remember encountering the power of a story? How old were you? Where were you? Who was telling the story? Who was reading the story? And what did it do inside? Let's start with you, T.I. Lowe.
No pressure, right?
Yeah.
Well, I'd have to say probably The Lottery Rose by Irene Hunt. Did anyone read that in middle school besides me? The Lottery Rose?
I didn't. I've never heard of that.
Oh, wow. Even my children have read it. It's just a book in the system for the school here. But it's about a little boy named Georgie, and he's abused. And man, that book hurt. It was painful to read, but so compelling. I wanted to know how little Georgie was going to overcome the abuse and the terrible life he had. And there was this rose bush he won at the supermarket in the lottery. And he put his hope in that little rose bush and how that rose bush got him through some really difficult moments. And that's probably the first time I really realized that even if it's a painful story, sometimes they've got to be told. And I've carried that with me, and I feel like that's even helped shape my writing as well as being, in my reading life.
Yeah.
So it's a Lottery Rose.
Well, there's something that I need to read now. Thank you for mentioning that. Robin Pearson, what do you say to that question?
I was in elementary school, either 3rd or 4th grade. And I remember we'd come in after lunch and we'd all be able to, like push aside the desks and kind of pile in the middle of the floor. And it was either Mrs. McElwain or Mrs. Smith. And she would read a book to us, and the book that I just loved the most that she started out with was Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing. And the way, I think I've talked about this before, but just the way she read that story, and you could hear the way she's, would, act out Fudge and, Peter, and you could just feel Peter's pain. But then as the youngest, I could, get Fudge and wanting that attention and all of that. And I thought, it was just like the best time, in school. And as much as, I enjoyed school, but just that time of reading and hearing those words, come to life. It was so powerful to hear them read aloud. And then, later I've always loved to read, out loud to my children. It's just, I've done it, since they were babies, and just, just simple words, like, that when you can read Goodnight Moon, and just these simple words, but that they, can grab you. And so that's what I want to do, in my writing. I want people to be able to identify with people like Fudge, who are not so lovable, but there's something, redeeming about him, as well as, Peter, and to see themselves and hear themselves in the story. Even if they don't hear it read aloud, you want to be able to put them there so that they can see it and feel it. So yeah, that was a great moment for me.
Rick Bragg talks about the best stories being people in trouble. The best stories, whether you're writing a newspaper article or you're writing fiction, it's about people in trouble, because everybody identifies with that. And I love those first two examples here from both of your lives. Michelle, what about you?
Well, I tell you what, my story kind of is good to piggyback Robin's, because my mom was the instigator of my love of books. She was a school teacher, and my dad was a voracious reader, so our home was filled with books. And I have a very treasured memory of being about 8 years old, and it was summertime, so she wasn't at work, we weren't in school, and she read Louisa May Alcott's Little Women to my sister and I. And even though she'd read, hundreds of books to us by then, and I was reading on my own, that was the first time that I really connected to the characters and even to the author, because there was Marmee with her Little Women, and there was me and my sister and my mom. And my mom had grown up in a family of 4 girls. So all of a sudden that story just came alive to me in a way that other stories, I'd enjoyed those stories, and I always enjoy stories, but that one just came alive. And even though I didn't ever dream about becoming an author, I think that was when the seeds were planted.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And in my life, I had a mother who read to me as well, but I think I picked up the power of stories when my mom would take us. I was the third of 3 boys, and so I was always the baby of the family. And she would go to my grandmother's house, and my grandmother's 2 sons lived with her, Pooch and Bill. And I can still remember that dimly lit in the evening, walking by the pump house. They never had a phone in the house, but walking in after they'd finished dinner, and Pooch sitting with his elbows on his knees, leaning forward with a cigarette in his hand. I think he smoked Camels. And the smoke just wafting up over that kitchen table, and me sitting in the little ante room and asking, "Tell the story about going hunting, Uncle Pooch." And he would start in. He was a carpenter. He had knocked all of the fingernails off of his fingers. He didn't have teeth at that time. They pulled his teeth, and he had false teeth, but he never wore them because they were uncomfortable. So without teeth, he would go through this story of it during the Depression going hunting, but they were so poor they didn't have a gun, and they only had a dog and a sack. And they would go and they would look for possum or raccoon, and they would eat the meat and then take the hides and sell it. And so he'd go through, and I'd heard this story 20 times, but every time I would ask, "Tell the story about going hunting again." And if I close my eyes right now, I can take you right back to that little kitchen. I can smell the smoke. I can smell the fat back. It's a very oral culture, but it was a storytelling culture. And I think I listened to that story. The end of the story is that they treated what they thought was a mink, and the mink's pelt was worth a lot, but they didn't have a gun. They didn't want to knock it off with a rock and have the dog chew it up. So they had to climb all the way up the top of the hill and knock on a guy's door that they knew had a gun. And he comes to the door and says, "Well, let me go with you. I've never seen a mink before." So he brings his gun down. They get all the way back down to the tree. Here it is, wee hours of the morning. And they try to decide who's going to shoot the mink. And so they decide the fellow who has the gun, he's the better shot, shoots the mink. The mink falls down. The guy looks at it and says, "You brought me down here at 3:00 in the morning to shoot my own cat." and that is the quintessential Southern story from West Virginia, from where I'm from. So now that we're all smiling, and that shows where we're enamored with our stories. Now let's fast forward to the books that we've written, the stories that we want people to know about today. So take a few minutes and tell me, how did this story that you've written that's out now, how has it bubbled to the surface in your life? Robin, let's start with you.
I'm supposed to follow up the cat. Not fair. Well, Till I Want No More, we've moved a lot in my married life. I'd always thought, I grew up in North Carolina, and I remember when I got engaged to my husband, we both went to college together, the same place. And I remember when he proposed, I said, I want to be able to, we may move once, but I plan to stay in North Carolina. My parents built a house and moved in when we were 5, and that's where they still are, to this day. And so that's what I thought I would have, in my life. And he agreed. And then we proceeded to move around, the East Coast from Florida, Boston, Florida, North Carolina twice, and New Jersey, and now back to North Carolina. But during all this time, I've carted around this trunk. I, packed it up after college and then, high school, college, and it's just filled with all kinds of things. And I've just brought it with me everywhere as I've run from, all my library finds. I've been taking this trunk with me. And one day, one of our last moves, we decided we'd open it. Now, my heart's kind of pounding. I don't know what's in it. Is there a dead body? What's in it? I haven't looked in it, in 20 years. And it was just all, these different things that some things I, threw away. There were some old letters, T-shirts, all kinds of, memories from when I, pledged my sorority in college, and just, yearbooks and things I just had forgotten all about. And I think about how I had put such value on these things, and some of, some weight with them. And it was like this burden that I lugged around with me. And, now I can see my daughters are wearing my old T-shirts with my name, my old, name before I got married on the back, where I graduated high school, and all these things that now, bring joy seeing them. And that's like the character, Maxine, who's been carting around all these different things in her life, this burden, from place to place, even though, and just not opening it up, and afraid to open it up, afraid to kind of free what's inside. And it's also tied to this sermon that I heard once called Esau is Coming. And, because one day, just like with this, trunk, you're gonna have to face, your past, and it's gonna come to you. You think about Jacob and how he was so afraid of what he had done. And, even though he, God had done those things in his life, and but he was afraid to meet Esau when he knew that he had to meet, this brother he had wronged, but not knowing that Esau had forgiven him and that he would, welcome him. And that's how I think it is with us. Sometimes we just bear these burdens. We cart them along with us. We make them huge, and we don't accept the forgiveness. We don't accept the freedom of just kind of, living our lives of facing the past and either letting it go, embracing it, letting it help us. And that's who Maxine is. She just won't, face it. She won't deal with, even though it's living and walking in step right along with her. That's Till I Want No More. And eventually having to learn to let it go, but also take it with you.
So answer this before we move on. Is it important for you to wrap up everything, to tie up all the loose ends? Does Maxine begin as, this person with all the burdens, and at the end, everything is great and everything is fine? Talk about that.
Isn't that how life is? Like,
yeah,
that's how my life is. Roses. Well, we join Maxine kind of in the middle. And I feel like that's like all our stories, right? We're kind of in the middle. There's stuff that's, it's happened, that's formed who we are today, that, that will change who we become, because we're always changing. It's like this process. And so we join her like right as she is planning to get married, and when when Esau, right, is right in front of her and she's having to deal with it. But no, it doesn't, like, all the little bows aren't tied at the end. There might be some knots that you still have to unravel. But there is a feeling of, okay, I can understand, I can see where this is going. The story will continue just with, our own lives. Like, even when one problem may be resolved and you know how to handle it, there's still more to come. And so I think with the book, it ends with that. Okay, there's hope. There's some resolution. You won't be dissatisfied, but also there's more to come. There's tomorrow. There might be another problem, but now I'm equipped to handling it. So
I like that answer, because there's a sense of surrender to what is,
right,
and just submission to what may come. You can't really submit to what may come until you surrender to what is, and move forward.
Right.
I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Robin, thank you. Okay, that's Till I Want No More. Now we're going to go under the tulip tree. And Michelle Shocklee. Michelle, tell us about this story.
Well, I am a lover of history. If you ask my history teacher in high school about me, he wouldn't have said that. But I have since learned how important history is and how much you can learn from it. And I also really enjoy working with older people. I've worked with older people for about 25 years now. And I can learn so much from them just by simply listening to them, listening them tell me their stories. And I think I learned that by sitting at my grandmother's feet. She was a master storyteller, and she had grown up in the Depression, and there was farm life, there was city life, there was all kinds of interesting things. You could just say one word and off she'd go on this wonderful tale. And that was kind of what I wanted to do with Under the Tulip Tree. It's a story of unlikely friendship between two women. Frankie is a 101-year-old former enslaved woman, and she's seen a lot of life. She saw slavery prior to the Civil War, and she saw a lot of hardship after the Civil War. And Rinna is a young woman who's in her early 20s, and her family was very wealthy prior to the stock market crash. And now the book is set in 1936. It's actually a time slip novel. So it's set in 1936 as well as the 1860s. And so in 1936, we're deep in the Great Depression, and the only job that Rinna could find was with a government program called the Federal Writers Project. And that was a real project back in the 1930s. And what it was the government sent out of work writers and teachers and historians, people who loved the written word. And they fanned out across 17 states, and they collected first person narratives of people who had lived through slavery. And there are over 2,000 of these narratives archived in Washington, D.C., and they are just phenomenal to read. And I discovered them about 8 years ago, and they just wouldn't let me go. And it was very much, the first time I read them was very much like sitting at my grandmother's feet. I could hear that person's voice. I could hear that person's story come alive to me as I read these narratives. And I had that book. I had a research book for about 8 years of those narratives. And all of a sudden, this idea just came to write that story. So that's what Under the Tulip Tree is. It's the story of a young woman who works for the FWP going to listen to the stories of these precious people who lived through something she can't even really imagine. So what my goal was with that story was to have the reader feel like Frankie was telling them her story. So hopefully that's what I achieved.
That's fantastic. You said that it wouldn't let you go, and that just that phrase, because if no tears in the writer, no tears in the reader, if you're telling a story that won't let you go, how do you let somebody else read it? That's what you want for them. You want them to be in it and not to let go of them, right?
Yes, exactly. And that was, that's how I still feel about Frankie, the character. She's my favorite character I've ever written in all my books. I know you're not supposed to have a favorite child, but I do. But yeah, I just wanted her. She had so much to tell, so much story to tell. And that's how I feel about the narratives. You know, those people lived through that. And that was the only story they had to tell. That was their life. And it was worth listening to.
Yes. So much for such a time as this, too. In this culture, we marginalize older people. We kind of push them aside. They're not important anymore. And a story like this could really awaken somebody to, even in their own family, go back to parents or grandparents and get that story that's going to die with them, right?
Absolutely. And, you know, I definitely encourage people to listen to the stories that their grandparents have, and their parents too. But what you just said was exactly it. The slave narratives were collected in the 1930s. And, you know, the Civil War ended in 1865. So these precious people were in their 80s, 90s, and 100s. So if their stories had not been collected at that point, they would have just disappeared.
Under the Tulip Tree, Michelle Shocklee, we've heard Robin Pearson talk about Till I Want No More. Now it's T.I. Lowe's turn in South Carolina, Under the Magnolias. T.I., tell us about it.
But I have to make one comment about Michelle when she was saying about history. And I wish I had listened better in school, because I'm fascinated by history now. So I keep encouraging my kids, pay attention in history class. There's things that we need to learn. And if you don't know about your history, you know, how are we not going to repeat a lot of it? So definitely history is very important. But here's my pretty little book, Under the Magnolias. We got an under theme going on, don't we, Michelle?
We do.
I don't know about you, but I love a good C.S. Lewis quote, right? Anybody else? No? Yeah.
Yeah.
One of his that I really I like to quote, and in my own words I'm going to say is, as a writer, we don't write to be understood, we write to understand. And that, to me, when I go into a new book, that's where I'm coming from. I want to understand something, a new story. And when I began research or looking at the first little flickers of a story with Under the Magnolias, it came from a point where I had saw too many headlines about prominent men in the community, prominent men, male leaders in churches, and they were committing suicide. And I wanted to understand where that was coming from. You know, what got them to that point that they didn't understand or didn't feel like they could reach out for help. And so it's a lot of exploring things that are hidden in Under the Magnolias. There's a quote in the inside. It says, "This night not only marked the end of the drought, but also the end to the long-held secret we kept hidden under the magnolias." And it's exploring all the things about what we keep hidden. When I was growing up in the South, you kept your skeletons buried either in the cornfield or somewhere else. You know, you didn't talk about. There was things you just didn't talk about, and families they went to pretty big measures to keep those things hidden. And so there's that. This is set in the 1980s, and so the fun thing about I can't write historical. I wish I could, because I love to read it. But this was me getting this back as far as I could. I felt comfortable in it. And sometimes I feel like you need to put some distance between you and something to get a better perspective. Like, yes, there is still a crisis with mental health, and there's too many stigmas, and people's not reaching out for help when they need it. But I was kind of hoping, if I put it back in the 1980s and we address it in that, one of the characters is battling bipolar disorder, which was not called that back then. But anyway, if they could see that character back then dealing with it, and then how the community ends up rallying around that family and helping them when it all comes out. I hope people will realize now that it's okay to go get some help too. And so that's the basis of this story is, exploring things that are hidden, and that's not always a good thing.
Was there any part of you as you were writing that, T.I., then that you found that was kind of a lot of times I will be writing and I'll see on the page something in the editing process, something that I didn't know I wrote that was coming from me, coming inside from the inside. Was there anything that bubbled up like that for you?
Well, I mean, I think that always happens as a writer, right? I mean, you're always given little pieces of you in it, and then when you read back over it, you're like, yeah, that's really, because I'm big about I'll get my hair nice and big and poofy, and I put on my the best smile with my lip gloss, and I'm just like that one. If someone ever asks, "How are you doing?" my instant answer is, "I'm fine. How are you?" And it's always, "I'm fine," but we're not always fine, are we? So that's definitely something that that's a part of me. And
Yes.
I'm the one that handles everything. I'm supposed to be like the mother hen of the group. And us ladies, we're not good about reaching out for help when we want it. And that was the main character, Austin Foster, in the book. She's the young lady, and she wanted to handle everything. So it was a journey for her to figure out that, yeah, you need help sometimes. And so it's perfectly fine to reach out and ask for it.
Yes. And there's a hurdle that you get. Oh, what about the answer about tying everything up at the end? Is there no bipolar at the end of the story? Or don't give us too much, but what about wrapping up tying those bows?
It's told in Austin's voice, and the epilogue, she says she didn't believe in happily ever afters, but she believed in healing ever afters. And it might not be in this time, but there would be a healing. So I wrapped it up that way.
Thank you, T.I. Lowe, Under the Magnolias. And hold the cover up one more time, because I think there's something about that cover that is really, that I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the hair. It's that's the thing that attracts people. That stands out in a bookshelf, doesn't it?
Yes, it was pretty funny when we were going through the design process, and I would clean out my office to get ready for these interviews, and I found the other ideas for covers, but this one drew everyone's attention on the team. And it was like, if nothing else, everybody's going to say, "Have you heard of Under the Magnolias?" And I'm like, "Have I?" Like, it's the one with the woman with the hair in her face. I'm like, I've seen that.
That's great. That's fantastic. All right. So we Tell I Want No More, Under the Tulip Tree, Under the Magnolias, and now A Piece of the Moon. I like what you used, the C.S. Lewis quote. I like what Lewis said about Narnia, that he had this image of going through the wardrobe and the snow and the lamppost and a fawn. And for me, there was a little radio station at the top of a knoll, and a red light blinking on the hillside, and then a pigeon that had hit a guy wire on that tower that was swirling down and hitting the ground. That was one of the first things that I saw in this story. It's about a little town in West Virginia called Emmaus, and there's a treasure hunt that goes on. An old, crotchety old guy who's rich, who's lost his wife, decides that he wants to hide a treasure in the hills somewhere. And his main goal is to get people to read the Bible, because he says that's where the real freedom is. So he gives clues, Bible verses as clues. And if you figure out all the clues, then you'll find the treasure. And this little town of Emmaus kind of explodes with the whole treasure hunt. But the pigeon is, there's a lady who works in a junkyard behind the radio station, and her name is Pamela, but everybody calls her Pidge because she has a pet pigeon that walks along the counter in the little office that they have. And so you've got Pidge with all of this longing, with this hurt in her life. You've got the radio station, which kind of represents another sense of longing for people who, this is the lowest radio station in the market, the lowest place on the totem pole. So if you make a mistake at some bigger station, Country 16 is the place where you fall. And when I was 16 or 17 years old, I got a job at this station. I worked went to school for a half a day, and I worked at the radio station for the other half a day. And that radio thing, my station manager said, Chris, Fabry, if you get into radio, it'll be in your blood the rest of your life. And he's right. I've been for 40 plus years now. I've done some semblance of radio with my life. And I knew for 40 years, I wanted to tell this story of the little station and all of it's set in 1981, the razor blade, cutting the oxide, cutting the tape, using the turntables, somebody bangs against the turntable and the thing. It's, I've heard from other people who worked in radio for a long time that this lets you in on the way radio used to be. It used to be that you wouldn't see the faces of the people that you listened to. You had to imagine what they were. And when you encountered them then in a coffee shop or grocery store and you heard their voice, you'd say, you don't look a thing like I thought you would. That's the way it always was. I remember the first time I ever saw a picture of Larry King. I'd listened to Larry King, Chicago, hello. I'd listened to him all these years. And then I saw his picture, just a very tiny little picture in USA Today. He wrote a column. And I thought, that's not Larry King. You know, Larry King's this great big hulking guy with big muscles and a deep voice. And he was this, you know, crotchety guy with the glasses. We all know what Larry King looks like now. So there is this sense of longing, of wanting to make sense of your life and get to another place, you know, to move up in the market. And into that, one of the main characters is Wait Evers, who does a program. It's a country station, but on Sundays he hosts a program called Wait on the Lord. But nobody hears the comma in the program title, WAITE. And he is the person who gives everybody a second chance. If you have fallen from a higher place, he will give you a second chance. And there's a teenage boy who comes to the station who has a real bad stutter. And he just wants to mow the yard, but Wait wrangles him in to be on the air using the razor blade, using the ability to edit himself. So there's this sense of in all of this, the treasure hunt, the redemption that comes, the connecting between the characters and second chances that has kind of stuck with me and followed me for the last 40 years. Finally, I've told it in A Piece of the Moon. And timing is great because the super flower blood moon happens on Wednesday of this week. So it's a sign everybody needs to get a piece of the moon. Okay.
I have a question
All right.
for you.
Okay.
Did you do a treasure hunt of your own?
When I was a kid, you mean?
No, for the book.
Right.
Did you like set one up just for you to do, your crowd, your family to do?
Well, we used to have the Easter egg hunts. Does that count? No, you know, I did think of asking Tyndale, you know, how about if you give me $500 and I'll hide it someplace? But that never happened.
That would be fun,
question.
though.
That was it. That's a marketing plan for the release, the next release. How's that sound? All right. So there's all of our books. There's kind of the impetus of them, our desire to tell stories that will last, that will stick to your soul. Now I have a few questions for my friends here. And the first is about Southern fiction. What is it about Southern fiction that is so powerful? Why does it draw you? Michelle, let's start with you.
Okay, well, I have a confession to make because all of you guys are actually Southerners, but I'm not. I grew up in Santa Fe, New Mexico, but I'm married a Texan. And so I've lived in Texas for 30-something years. I've lived in Oklahoma, and now we live in Tennessee. And there is just something beautiful about the Southern life. I love it. I love the accent. I love T.I.'s accent. That just is so beautiful. I love sweet tea, you know, and so I've just really been absorbed in the history of the South in a way that I had never been growing up in New Mexico. It's a totally different history, you know, it's like two different countries, and it was.
Yes.
But yeah, so I just love the beautiful life that Southerners live. It's just, it's a very slow, peaceful life, I think.
You know, I resonate with that because I grew up in West Virginia, south of the Mason-Dixon,
Mm.
and then moved to Chicago, where I lost my accent and I don't talk like I used to. And then we moved to Colorado and then down to Arizona. And what I've seen is that in each place I have found similar struggles that everybody has in the South. I think a lot of times as a Southerner, I've wanted to laugh the hurt away, laugh. If you can make a joke about the pain, you can distance it from yourself a little bit, and that's the way that you cope with it. But other people in other places of the country are the same way. It just looks a little bit different in geography. How about you, Robin? What about Southern fiction really strikes you as powerful?
Well, to address the sweet tea, it's funny. I never say sweet tea. I say iced tea because there's no other way to drink it but sweet. So I don't think I need to say sweet tea. So, we've lived, I grew up here in North Carolina, and we've lived so many different places, but the South is where my heart has always, been. And it's funny, when I was working in Boston and my coworkers, would say, I know when you're talking to your mom, because suddenly, you're saying mama and you're saying, just like a different person. And, and I brought the hugs to South Jersey. It's just, I wouldn't say the South is necessarily always peaceful and loving, but there's a warmth. I think there is, like you said, a way of handling pain and painful situations that we have. And I think that's what I try to do in my work. The desire to connect with people. I know that sometimes Southerners get a bad rap of not really meaning, how are you? Or they don't mean, bless your heart. But I guess in my background, I guess, like Michelle said, my grandmothers and my parents, when I ask you, I mean it. When I start a conversation with you in the grocery store, I really do want to know if that, how to figure out that watermelon is ripe. Like, I really want to know those things. I'll talk to anyone, and so I want to connect with people. And I think that's what Southern fiction seeks to do, is to connect you through experiences, positive and negative, that past, that history that is so, painful, that we have to, work to use it and build on it. And, it's something that all of us, can connect to and not, divide us. And so that's what I love about, this for Southerners. I don't know, Southern fiction, I always feel like you have faith. You have, that sound. Yes, you have the food, of course, family, that love of family. And that's what I write about. And that's what draws me to it, keeps me coming back. And I think you see it in television shows. The Southerner always has there's a stereotype, but there's some truth, in it, So I think it makes you feel comfortable. It invites you to sit down. It invites you to keep reading, to learn more. So yeah, that's what I love about it. Nothing against Northerners.
I like
I've
that.
lived there too.
You can see too, there can be a veneer of warmth that then when you get beneath that, you see what's really going on.
Yeah.
And that's not to be pejorative to anybody, but it's especially in Southern church culture, you can see what's on the surface and then what's happening below. And that can really hurt people to see that for the first time.
Yeah, I can. But it's about going deeper. I know that's another question, but yeah, it's about going deeper and encouraging your readers to go deeper.
Yes. Good. T.I., with Southern fiction, talk about that.
I love everything about it. Just point blank. No. I love the charm of it, the voice of it. We don't use fancy words. If it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of deal. We just are who we are. And I like how Robin said about the hugs. That's probably been like the hardest thing, going to church and not hugging one another through this past year. We're very hands-on, and then talking to people in the grocery store. My children they try to drag me on because we have this trouble with Southern goodbyes, and they drag out, don't they? They just keep going. And but I love, of course, food. Food's a big thing. So it's lunchtime around here now, so I got my cheese straws, and I have my iced tea, like Robin pointed out. And then there's this something else that's really fun about the South is that we know how to be unkind politely. Take, for example, say, Susie, honey, what happened in that shirt? Did you lose a little bit of it? Bless your heart. and I just think our voice, our different approach of things, I guess that can draw a reader in, because if you want to come sit by me and we can talk plain all day long, and we talk about food all day long, and there's a lot of food a lot of times in my stories, because I love to eat, and I just think it's welcoming, even in the topics of, each one of us have serious topics in our books. I think it's a welcoming story too. Yes.
I've got a friend, Rod Dreher, who writes about a lot of different things, and he'll write in magazine form. But he's told me that people have told him that when he writes about Louisiana, when he writes about the roots, about where he's from, he wrote a book about his sister, the Little Way of Ruthie Lemming, and when he does that, they said his stories come alive to them because it feels authentic to him about where he's come from. So I think there's something about that. And I've seen the same thing for me. I've written stories set around the country, but it's when I go back to the hills, I know these people, I know how authentic they are and how they will just sit down and tell you the truth when you need to hear it sometimes. And I think that draws readers in. So talk about, T.I., you answered this, the most practical writing advice that you've ever been given. What would you say?
Well, I've only been in this whole biz for about 7 years, and I began as a indie author. So, and I thought it gave me the freedom just to, be true to my voice, my Southern voice, my twang, as some people call it. And I was nervous when I went to Tyndall House. I was scared they were going to make me change my voice. And they're like, no, that's what we love about you. Don't change your voice. And I remember going into the first editing process with my lovely editor, Kathy, and her and Miss Jan too. I was nervous about that whole change, are we going to change this part, that part of the story? And they're like, no. And they never have. And then they said, stay true to your voice. And I think that's really good advice.
I like that. Michelle, how would you answer that? Practical writing advice.
Well, I went to my very first writers conference a long time ago, 1999, and I had no idea what I was doing. I just knew that there was something I wanted to do. And there was this author who was going to be teaching the fiction track, and I'd never heard of her. And so I went into the class and everybody was starstruck, and I was like, what is going on? Well, it was Francine Rivers. And by the time I left that conference, I was a fan, even though I hadn't read a book yet. But I remember just being very green, and her telling us that this is a marathon. This isn't a sprint. Just learn as you go. You're going to write a lot of books that probably aren't ever going to be published, but keep going. And, that is very true. And I just would want to tell young authors, keep going, keep going.
Great. Oh, that's what I needed to hear today. Robin, how about you?
Well, just the whole querying process. I mean, writing a book is hard enough, but getting it out there and not being afraid to put it out there, and to deal with rejection, possible rejection. But I had a friend who just died recently, but when I was really afraid when a long time coming was, about to get launched, and I was really worried, and I just never imagined people reading it. And he said, did you write a 400-page book of secrets? And I thought, no, I guess I didn't, so as a writer, you can't be afraid of your work, being read. You didn't write for yourself, you wrote for it to be enjoyed, for, to even maybe be hated, but, for someone to read it and to learn from it, to share it. And so we just can't walk in fear. I mean, I have to tell myself that every time I have one of these wonderful things, or when I sit down at the computer and I'm trying to figure out what's, the next word, but to just not be afraid to put it out there, to put yourself there, because someone needs to hear it, needs to meet you through your words, and to just keep trying, and not to take that rejection and go run and hide in the corner, which is what could be easy to do.
Yes, the rejection. I want to talk about that. Probably one of the best things that I received from another writer was Jerry Jenkins, because we worked at Moody Bible Institute at the same time. And he knew that I wanted to write, and I would send him ideas that I had for stories. And one day he said, he looked at the story that I had written, and he said, if you really want me to help you, I will, I can, but it'll hurt. And I thought, well, bring on the hurt, go for it. I really want to write. And what I realized I really wanted was to be published. I wanted to see my name on the spine of a book. I wanted to walk into a bookstore and say, this is something that I did, that I wrote. And when Jerry handed that first page back to me with the way that he would edit it as an editor, he was working for the magazine at the time, I looked at that and it was like, there's nothing left there. What did you leave of my story? But I was able to get over the hurdle of, he knows more than I do. He's been there before. He's done this longer than I have. And so I'm going to listen to him, and I'm going to try to see what he sees in what I've done. And he's always said the first draft of every story is not that good. You want it to be Nobel Prize winning work, but it's not. It's in the editing process that it becomes what it can become with the help of others. And so I think one of the best advice is you've got to choose your editor that you're going to trust carefully. Don't just trust anybody who looks at your story, because you get 100 different ideas about it. But trust the people, get people around you who know more than you do, and trust them to help you make this the best story that it can be. So that's helpful advice, as it has been for me. One of the things that I've struggled with, though, especially early on, was, who are you? In the Southern culture that I grew up in, you don't be uppity. You don't become too big for your britches. You sit down and shut up. You don't say, what's really on your mind. And so there was a hurdle, almost a double hurdle, that I had to get over of, what do I have to say? Who am I? How do you deal with that comparison, or the voice that says in your head, who do you think you are? Who do you think you are to write a story? Robin, you first.
Well, I have this, I'm looking at it now, but this photo tree that's on my wall. And we've put our house on the market. We've taken all the photos out of it. We were given this advice years ago that, people want to see themselves in your house, so you should take down your photos. And I've since, realized that I don't necessarily think that's necessarily true for black and white, and, for everyone selling a home. So we would, the last time we sold a house, we put different photos, of other people in our photo tree and took us out. And, I wouldn't do that again. Like if I get, my arm twisted behind my back and my husband forces me to leave, I wouldn't do it, again. And I realized, I'm always comparing myself or thinking less than or thinking other. And sometimes with marketing and wanting to put someone else, in my place, or to think that someone else would do a better job of, what, I'm doing. Even in this conversation, I've been kicking myself that I didn't show my book, or that, I didn't talk about, the story I talked about me. I didn't even talk about Maxine getting married and all those other things, like constantly rethinking and thinking I could do this better, and comparing myself to everyone else. But, I have to remind myself that this story and these stories, God has given me, this story, and the other story and the story that I'm working on now. And sure, there might be different ways of telling it. And you see, I mean, there's millions of stories in the world of many, books about the same events and in history or, contemporary fiction, but no one can tell the story you tell but you. And to not compare myself and, even in interviews and, in parenting as a homeschooling mom, I mean, constant, like, oh my gosh, their kids did this and they're doing this activity. But you have to, and you can, make your kids crazy by trying to live and teach and work the way another family, but knowing that God designed us perfectly, the way that He did. And I'm just trying to always, tell myself that, like, okay, I get nervous, or okay, I like to write this way, or I could be long-winded, sorry, but that's the way God, designed me, and trying to walk in that, and to let whatever picture, however I am, to let it hang on the wall, to just put it out there, and and get accepted or not, but to be true to the Lord and to who I am.
That hurts my heart to think that you would need to take down who you are, from the wall. There's a story in there or something, and if I steal that, you'll know where it came from. I love what Adrian Rogers, pastor, long time, died in 2005, and Adrian Rogers said, there are people who can preach the gospel better than I can, but nobody can preach a better gospel than I can. That there's something about, there's surrender, just like you talked about a minute ago. There's surrender and submission to who you are rather than trying to be somebody else. T.I., what would you say to that inadequacy, comparison, the voice? Who do you think you are?
Well, first, Robin, let's see your cover.
Yeah, there you go.
Let's see it. It's a beautiful cover.
There you go. Thanks, T.I. There you go.
Yay.
Yay.
I love the truck on it. My dad had a truck growing up. And he took me to tennis practice one day, and he was bondoing. Is that what you call it when you're redoing the paint job? It was a baby blue. And I hid in the floorboards because I didn't want anybody seeing me that when he pulled up to drop me off to practice after school. But all right, so get back on point here. I have to
thank you.
It's a little bit to go with Robin. I don't feel adequate at all, ever. I've not overcome it. I don't feel adequate to be on this panel with such amazing authors. But and I've just come to the point, you know what? I'm going to brave it and do it anyway. I don't, even if I don't feel adequate enough. There's a piece of advice that I give authors. I'm not, it's nothing just grand or whatever, but I hold it to me when I'm writing, and that's, I'm going to write what God leads me to write, what's on my heart, not what people think I should write. Right. And I think if we keep that our focus, it's always going to be our story, and it's always going to be adequate enough in our voice. Mm-hmm. So plain and simple, that's how I feel.
I love it. Michelle, what about you?
Well, a number of years ago, when I first joined American Christian Fiction Writers, ACFW, I joined with a lot of other authors like Tamara Alexander and Kim Vogel-Sawyer, and we were all unpublished. And I watched some of these girls just skyrocket in their publishing careers, and I was so happy for them. And I really had to make myself not be envious and think, well, what's wrong with you? Why can't you write a book that is going to, catch the attention of a publisher and make you skyrocket as well? And the Lord really put the verses that Paul speaks about running your race. I can only run my race. Tammy will run her race. Kim will run her race. And there are prizes for all of us along the way, but I don't want her prize and I don't want her prize. I want what's for me. And so God had a lot of other things I needed to do in my life before I could get published. And, it wasn't because I was inadequate or I wasn't talented. I did have a lot to learn for sure. And I'm still learning, but, God has a plan, and you just have to understand that it's His timing. It's not always your timing. And so I am running my race, and I'm going to be happy with it.
I often wonder who mentioned the understanding thing. We write to understand. Was that you, Robin? Did you say that?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So I've often thought of the same thing. Maybe my writing, the stories that I've written, it's not for other people. Maybe it's and I want it to be. I want millions of people to read my stories, but maybe this is all about me understanding myself or going deeper. Pat Conroy's, I've been reading My Reading Life Again, and on audio, and it's Pat reading himself. And he actually signed this for me to Chris. Happy 50th birthday. My best to you in your writing life. Go deeper, always go deeper. And this was June of 2011. So I thought I was the only one that Pat Conroy said that to. And I've since learned he said that to everybody. He said that every writer, that was his idea. Go deeper, always go deeper. So as we kind of wrap up here today, what does that mean? What does it mean to go deeper? T.I., what would you say?
First, I have to say I love that book, and I encourage any writer to read it, even though he's talking about his reading life. And I absolutely loved when I found out that he writes longhand, or he did write longhand, because I do too. Let me see if I can get this stack to show you.
Oh boy, behind the scenes, look at this.
I always have journals.
Wow.
And I go deeper by journaling my characters. A lot of times they'll have a whole book just themselves, and it's almost like I'm interviewing them constantly. And I'll do this months before I even go to the keyboard, because I really want to get to know them before I start the story. I'll know things about them I never share with you as a reader, but I'll know them, and they're, it's almost our secrets between me and the character. So definitely, that's me going deeper. I journal. Now let me put them
That's
down.
fantastic. But see, that elongates the process. That takes so long to be able to get that deep in the character. That would scare a lot of writers to say, but I want to sit down and write it for 6 months and be done with it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, once I get to that point, I mean, you can ask Robin. I'm lickety split. I'll bang out some books. I've written
crazy.
I've published 17, and I've written over 20. I've 17 published, and I have 7 in my drawer. So, and that's been in 7 years. So do the math on that. So, I mean, once I'm pretty fast once I get to the keyboard.
Wow.
Well, if anybody breaks into your house and steals those journals for later sales on eBay, you'll know it was one of us 3. Okay.
All right. There's boxes in the attic too, so help yourself.
Wow.
All right, Robin, what about you?
When I think about, I guess, going deeper, it made me think about on our honeymoon, we went snorkeling, and it was amazing. It was just right there, at the surface, all you could see, like just under the water. Then I was sure that so much more I could see if we had like just gone deeper and did scuba diving, but I was too afraid to do that. I didn't feel equipped to do that. It made me think about marriage, and how that honeymoon phase of the first couple of years, and you're just kind of getting to know each other, and it's just finding out what you like and don't like, and but then as the years pass, you've gone deeper and deeper. And I'm sure these recent years, especially after I turned 50, my husband is like, let's get back to the honeymoon, but it's so good and so rich when you can go deeper, because there might be pain, there might be trouble, but there's so much you can learn and so much you can see. And it just makes the story just so, just complete. And so it's good to you can't just stay at the surface. You can't just nibble. You can't just stay at the buffet, but be able to sit down and have a full, complete meal, and to, go deeper with God. I mean, he'll take you to so many places if you're willing to just, let him take you to those places that hurt, but that are so beautiful. It's pretty, right? But it's beautiful. So yeah, that's what I try to do. I said 8 for you.
Food metaphor coming back again. Michelle, go deeper. What does that mean?
Well, you know, as a younger writer, I didn't go deep. And that was probably one of the reasons why I wasn't published early on. But I was afraid to. I was afraid to take the characters into those areas that, oh, wow, is somebody going to not like this area? Is somebody going to get hurt by this? What's the feedback going to be? And just as an example, in this book, in Under the Tulip Tree, as I started writing Frankie's character, I stalled. I stalled at about not even halfway through the book because her character just wasn't right. It just wasn't right. And I had to step back, and I went about a month of not writing, of just reading more of the slave narratives. And I realized I wasn't taking Frankie's character deep enough. She was just a very flat character. And I won't give away what happens to her in the story, but a picture I was looking through the slave narrative pictures that were taken in 1936, and there is this precious woman, and I've actually got this picture here. There is this little slave woman, if you can see it. She's sitting on her front porch. She's not a slave, I'm sorry. She's a former slave. She's sitting on her front porch in Mississippi. She's a sharecropper, and they don't give her name, so I'll never know her name until I get to heaven. But there's something wrong with her hand in her lap. And the first thing I said when I saw that picture was, wow, what happened to her hand? And the answer to that question changed the entire book.
Wow.
And it took me deeper.
And it came alive for you. I love hearing all three of you, because the process is probably different for all of us, but it is getting to that, kind of the nerve of the story, that if we feel it, then the reader's going to feel it. I have, my son did this Ernest Hemingway thing behind me, and it says, write hard and clear about what hurts. And so I think that's what we're all trying to do, about getting down to the depth of the pain, so that we don't just make sense of it or tie up all the bows, but we surrender and submit to it so that life can then become a richer thing. And that's what we hope for our readers. Till I Want No More, Under the Tulip Tree, Under the Magnolias, A Piece of the Moon. Robin, Michelle, T.I., it's been really fun to get to know you a little bit better. And thanks for your time today. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.